Welcome to Failed Forward, a podcast for professionals who are wondering, how the hell did I get here?
Join your host, Rachel Durkin, and me, Donna Miller, as we discuss the messy, bumpy, and often unattractive journey to success.
After all, if it isn't hard to do, is it really worth doing? Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Failed Forward, the podcast for those of us wondering, how the hell did I get here? My name is Rachel Durkin. I'm with Paradigm Marketing and Design. We are a web marketing, branding, and sales enablement agency that customizes and working with clients with a complex sale. So if you have a sales team and you want them to have more qualified meetings and close more deals more quickly, we can help build a marketing to sales infrastructure that will make that happen. And I am joined every week by my lovely and talented co-host, Donna Miller. Donna, I want you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. Yes, I am Donna Miller. I am Chief Visionary Officer at C3 Workplace and founder of Donna Miller Business Growth Consulting, where for 30 years we've been helping companies next level their firms and their teams by providing business advisory and support services around operations, finance, and biz dev. Clients bring us in because they know we'll build efficient, integrated systems that they can execute on, or we can help them execute on, building the foundation for a company that ultimately will run and grow without them. Kind of a beautiful thing, but we're not really here to talk about beautiful things. But join me in welcoming our guest this week, Scott Weintraub. So Scott, before we talk about failing forward, tell us how fabulous you are and what you do.
Thank you. Great to be here, guys. As Donna said, I'm Scott Weintraub. A little bit of background. Most of my career was in marketing. After college, I went to Penn State. After college, I joined Procter & Gamble. I marketed soap, shampoos, antiperspirants. Went to Crayola, marketed crayons. Went to Pfizer, marketed, medicine/drugs. But then in 2007, I'd say I became an entrepreneur. I had started a franchise business in 2002, but in 2007, I jumped in both feet. I started.
Good timing.
Well, it was interesting because I do remember, I started a pharmaceutical marketing company, co-founded a pharmaceutical marketing company. And when you talk about good timing, I remember going to the eye doctor. And, they put that thing in front of your eyes, A, B, A, B. And he's talking to me. He's like, hey, I noticed you got different insurance. It was like 2009 or something, 8. We've been in business for a year. Different insurance. Did you get a new job? I said, I started a company, and he's like, what are you doing? And, I don't really want to engage with this guy. I got the, drops in my eyes. I'm like, I'm doing consulting. And he's like, are you, busy enough? I said, yeah, I'm busy. He goes, well, are you so busy that you need help? I said, actually, yeah, I need some help. And he's like, oh, how many people have you hired to help? I said, we're up to 28 people. He pulls the thing away from in front of me, 28 people. That's great. I'm like, let's focus on the eyes here.
So it went really well.
So it started off great. And in 2020, I sold the business to private equity. Private equity said this is life-changing money, but I'll be really clear, it didn't change my life. I just bought a car. It was a used car, so nothing changed that way. But one interesting part of the journey is in 2014, we had grown 7, 8, 9, 10, and then by 11, 12, we were half the size. From 2012, we had basically cut the company in half versus 2010. And you can imagine, it's extremely frustrating, every single day, like I can't figure out how we're going to grow this company. It feels like there's no accountability. I'm working crazy hours and every decision goes through me. It feels like, so I'm the bottleneck. So I hired another company, probably similar to yours, Donna, a consulting company called Petra. They help put a process in place to grow and scale the company, using the Rockefeller habits based on John Rockefeller. And we grew from, we were flatlining at like $7 million. 8 years later, it was a $70 million company.
Wow.
So it grew fantastically. So, after I sold, I kind of retired. I was 56 years old. I'm like, I'm I'm not ready to totally retire. So I actually called up that company and said, hey, would you be interested in having a part-time coach do what you guys did for me? And they said, that would be great. So now I'm a coach. So I'm coaching other companies. Full-time coaches would have 20 clients. I have 4, which is plenty for me. So that's kind of what I'm doing now.
That's quite the journey. So, this podcast is called Failed Forward. I'm going to imagine you weren't in a great place in 2012, like mentally.
Yeah. So
Talk to us about how did you deal with that?
yeah, I remember in probably 12 or 13. So what happened is I used to work at Pfizer, and when we grew, we went from 400 grand to 800 grand to 4 million to 15 million. So we're $15 million in 2010. We've been in business less than 4 years. One company, Pfizer, was 10 of that 15 million. So I tell people there's a Spanish saying for that. I don't know if either of you guys know what that's called. It's called no bueno. It was not good. And then they lost their biggest drug. It was a $10 billion drug. It goes off patent. So they cut budgets, and we go from 10 million down to 1 million. So what I did pretty much every single day is compared where we were versus 2010. So, a $6-7 million company is a great company, but when you compare it to at 15, it looks like an F every single day. And we had one, a year before, Inc. 5000 has, the 5,000 fastest growing companies. So it was it was in my signature. And I remember sending my, college buddy an email. Hey, want to go grab a drink? And he's like, hey, I saw your signature. And he thought it said Fortune 500 versus Inc. 5000. He's like, I can't believe you're Fortune 500. You're doing great. Oh my gosh. So he's like, how big is your company? I'm like, oh, we're $7 million. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. And I said, hey, how would you feel if I told you 2 years ago we were 15? And he's like, yeah, that's not so good. So I'd say I dealt with it not well. Like
it's hard mentally.
Yeah, exactly. Mentally
Really
it's hard.
hard.
Like yeah, you just
feel like you're faking it.
Like I was gonna say the failure, but faking it would be better.
I think it's because we all take it so personally. It's like these businesses, we built them with blood, sweat, and tears, and they become like, one of your children or something. And when it's not doing well, it affects everything. So when you had Pfizer drop off and you had to make the decision, what was that like? What was that decision to radically, I guess, lay a whole lot of people off?
Yeah, so it wasn't logically a tough decision because hey, there's
Just
no
emotionally,
there's not a lot of work. We need less people. So it's all right, we're gonna lay off people. And then it's like who. So the who became, very difficult, and frankly didn't lay off enough because it was so difficult. Because how can you let Donna go? She's fantastic. How can you let Rachel go? She's fantastic.
And I spent so much time developing them and putting growth in.
And also, like some of them, they're single income families, or single income person, whatever. And it's like, how are they going to pay their bills? And the reason they're getting laid off is, my fault. It's not their fault. They did nothing wrong. It's my fault for not diversifying, etc. So it was tough. I remember, telling people one at a time, and maybe by the second or third person, the person said to me, "Yeah, like this must be really hard for you." And I was like, "That's interesting, because you just got fired," saying that to me. So I must look terrible, and I felt terrible. I just remember the night before, can't sleep. Yes, it was bad. And when I worked at Procter and Gamble and Pfizer, I had fired people. There was no emotion.
But you're not responsible then, or you don't feel responsible.
It was just like, oh, we got to get rid of someone else. Okay, well, we get rid of Rachel. Bam, gone. Like it was no big deal. This was a big deal.
Now, okay, so emotionally crushed. how did you pick yourself up? Like, how did you decide, all right, this was a whole
Yeah, what
failure.
was the lesson learned in that?
What was the
Yeah.
lesson learned? How did you, and how did you decide when you were ready to learn the lesson? Because we all can get weepy for a while. Some of us
Yeah.
will just give up and not even come back. But how did you
So,
decide to pull
yeah,
yourself
yeah.
up?
So I mean, I'm not sure when I learned the lesson, but it's one I probably knew before. It was about diversifying your clients.
Mm-hmm.
And we had purposely done the exact opposite. Because what happens when you do a marketing piece for a drug company, they have to approve it. Legal, regulatory, compliance, they all approve this. And they have a process. You load it into a system, blah, blah, blah. Well, back then, most of them were manual, like you brought in paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I
I've been in
remember,
those meetings. They're
yeah.
like eye gouging.
So I show up to Johnson and Johnson with, this massive box of paper. And I have 10 copies, color, double side, whatever their rules were. And the guy's like, what are you doing here? What's with all this? And I'm like, submitting this stuff. He's like, we use a system. And what I've realized is we had submitted stuff to Johnson and Johnson using Sanofi Aventis's process. We mixed them up. So I'm like, hey, the problem is we have too many customers. Let's just do less customers really, really well. So we purposely went deep, which made our jobs easier, and you make higher margins, and was all good until one of them said, hey, we don't need you anymore, which is why in hindsight, and I logically knew diversifying was good, but I was like, hey, I'm not diversified and it's so much better. And what's the chance of one of these big customers going away?
Pretty good.
1%. And I hit the lottery there and lost, right? So, yeah, that was the biggest lesson, is to diversify, which everybody knows already. Even if, being super, super, super focused is more profitable.
Did having a partner help you, as to come out of that, like leaning on them?
I would say yes, because I couldn't quit, because then I'd have to tell him I was going to quit, and vice versa. So I would never bring it up. So I don't think I shared how, well, I definitely didn't, because I don't remember sharing how bummed I was, how emotionally spent I was, etc. But I knew it's like, hey, I can't let him down.
Yeah, you got to keep going.
Vice versa. So, and we still had a company, right? We didn't go down to 1%. It was still, like I said, the first year was $6 million. So it's still, plenty big enough to support employees. And what happened to the 10 or 12 we laid off, I didn't want that to happen to the other 10 or 12, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned before we started recording something about an opportunity to sell the company. Was that around then?
Yes. So actually, probably 2 years before we had this huge crash, we were, on the upswing. We get a letter, unsolicited. Some consultant says, hey, I have a client. He's looking to buy a company that meets XYZ criteria. You guys fit it. And what people don't realize, I'm given the super highs and super lows. Like every day is either a high or a low. And there's no average days, it feels like. So this was a low day. And, low days are typically, we screwed something up that, I'm embarrassed. Maybe the clients don't even notice it, but I'm embarrassed. Or they noticed it and they let us know, right? So I don't remember what it was, but it was a particularly bad day. So my partner says, hey, I got this letter, someone wants to buy the company. And I remember saying, hey, if there's anyone dumb enough to buy this place, let's just dump it on them, So he's like, yeah, that's what I'm thinking also. So we write back, the person comes in, he's like, hey, I got to do due diligence. We sign a, non-disclosure. He starts going through our books. And then I remember he's going to do a presentation to us. He's like, first, how much do you want for the company? We're like, you tell us, you approached us, you did all the due diligence. If it's a big number, we'll sell. So he comes in with PowerPoint, and he opens his PowerPoint, and before it goes to full screen, you can see a top slide one of, so it's like slide 1 of 78. And I'm like, So I said, hey, just jump to slide 78. I don't
Yeah.
on this. He's like, no, 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 I want to take you through. So he takes us through, and it was maybe 30 slides, and 40 of them were appendix.
Mhm.
But at the end, he's like, hey, your company's not worth anything because every decision in the company goes through you two. You guys are the bottleneck. If I buy it and you leave, there's no company here.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, we're not selling for zero. So, forget it. Thanks. Nice meeting you. And then he leaves, and me and my partner, like, he's kind of right.
Mhm.
Like, it's not a company, it's like a job of two people with,
Bunch of
15,
helpers. Yeah.
yeah, secretarial helpers. Like, the second highest paid person was $50,000 probably.
Wow.
It was really junior people. For a $6 million company, we should have had some
Mhm.
managers, but
Middle
none.
management.
Yeah.
And then he goes, oh, and by the way, in our bookkeeping system, we hired a bookkeeper 20 hours a week. She had sticky notes on her laptop of when we had to send out bills. And he's like, oh, and by the way, Novartis owes you $200,000. You guys have to send a bill. Yeah. And it's like, oh, this is embarrassing. So he goes, you guys need a billing system. So I remember he left. I said to my partner, I said, yeah, yeah, billing system. I said, that sounds like a strength of yours. You should go figure that out. He's like, I'm not very good at that. You should do that. So I was like, so he says, why don't you call the guy and ask him how he would solve that problem?
Yeah.
So I call him up. He says, you should do this, this, this. So we did it, got a billing system. Then we started calling him, once a month with a question. Hey, remember you told us this? How would you solve it? And after like the third time, he's like, hey, I'm going to have to start charging you guys.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'd be happy to pay you, but my company's not worth anything. You know that. So actually, we hired him on, and then he became a minority partner eventually.
Awesome.
He stayed for
Wow.
like 5 years, and then he retired early. He was a few years older than us.
And so we're running up on time. This is so interesting, Scott. But I
Yeah.
want to kind of like fast forward to the
The hope.
celebration point here, the hope. But and I just know you, and I know that you're, I'm a big fan of the scaling up model. So if anybody's interested in figuring out how to put systems in place, like they should definitely talk to you about the Rockefeller habits. But or Donna, of course, you're very good at scaling up too. But what was it that moment when you went from the 7 million to the 70 now? Like you've got up, you went through some really bad hurdles. Like what was that? Like what was on your mind when that happened? What made you motivated to do that? And and you needed a coach, right? Like you couldn't do
Yeah.
it alone.
So what happened is, I just realized like I was frustrated we weren't growing. I
Mm-hmm.
was sick and tired of the lack of accountability, and there was no processes in place. I was working 60 hours a week, like I can't do more.
Yeah.
So I read some of these books, Scaling Up, EOS, 3HAG, the 4DX.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually called, we did due diligence. I called the companies, got references, went through all that and hired them. And, went from 7 to 70 million, but, it took 8 years.
Yeah,
So
but
it's
that's
not
still a
like,
pretty good growth rate.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't, it still took, a lot of work and time. And, some of besides, the habits in there, other things that, like important lessons would be like hiring experts. So I told you the first employees were all super junior because I believed wrongly that,
Mm-hmm.
hey, they can do 80% as good for
Nope.
50 grand versus somebody for 150. But that extra 20% makes the customer 10 times happy.
Mm-hmm. And retains
So,
them. Mm-hmm.
right. So like we had, we finally hired a real creative person, a real CFO who worked everywhere, outside experts. We hired, a product development company to help us, customer service training time. So it's like, we really just upscaled our partners. We like applied for a patent because we had an analysis company to help us figure out how to analyze this data. We got a patent. We couldn't have done stuff like that on our own. So that was, and that costs money. And if you're super cheap, it's your own company, your own money, you don't do that. But hiring experts was good. And I'd say another big one was like delegating. Like I was a believer that hey, I'm the smartest guy in the room. I can do it twice as good as everybody else. I can do it quicker than teach them, all those kind of things you've heard. And I had a coach, and I remember she said, hey, long story short, she's like, you're probably 2 or 3 times as good as the average employee. And I was like, okay, I like this conversation. Where's it going? And then and we had 50 people. And she's like, do you think you're better off doing the work of 2 people or teaching the 50 of them to each be 10% more effective? And I'm like, yeah, that would be way better.
Mhm.
So, that for me, that was a light bulb moment. And then also like hiring for culture. Like we had some people who they were, you heard the term cancer, like they weren't that bad, but like I didn't like them. And I'm like, why am I hiring people? Like I wouldn't be friends with this person. Like they don't, but I don't even like being around them. So why are I hiring? And when I analyzed why I didn't like them, it was like this one person in particular. I'm a pretty positive person, we'll figure it out. And this person was, cup half empty. What about this? What about this? I don't think we can do it. I'm like, this is just painful. Every time I have to go talk to her, it was like I dreaded it. So we should hire for culture. And when we started doing that, work became more fun. And when it becomes more fun, everyone just produces more. So, it was a lot of growth, but it was, probably went from 7 to 9 to 13. It took off more towards the end. And then, Donna knows we just had systems in place where we actually could scale. When we first started the company, it was year one. So we did 400 grand that year. I had sold a project, for, I don't know, like $2-3 million. And my partner's like, we can't do that much work. Like, what are you doing? So I went back to the guy and I said, you're going to get a lot of scrutiny on it. It was AstraZeneca. You're going to get a lot of scrutiny on this. Maybe we should just do a pilot this year for, 200 grand. Then we'll crush it. And then next year we'll do the full 2 million. And he's like, you're the first vendor ever who's downsold me. That's what we'll do then. And he didn't know, and hopefully
But you couldn't handle it.
that it was all because we would have failed, right? So
wow, so much wisdom in there.
Yeah.
And so much of what you say, so many people have been through. It's hiring the wrong people.
We're not through yet, but they will.
Not having process. But it's so great to hear how you clearly failed majorly forward. So we're thrilled that you could join us today and share your story. Before we wrap, how can our audience reach you?
I guess email would be the best. Scott Weintraub at Scott. Actually, the best would be Scott@petracoach.com.
Perfect. And this will all be in the show notes, so don't work too hard on it. So Scott, thank you. Loved hearing your story. And so I want to encourage all of you, until we see you again, embrace the concept of failing forward. We all have something to learn from it. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.